chance to play with some incredible people in the Android Netrunner, rest in peace, and Magic the Gathering communities. But it's time to clean off the rose-tinted glasses and use what I've learned from the other games to dive into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Coming up this week is the second week of the Back to Duel League, and in order to prepare for that, we're going to be looking into a program called YuGiOh Pro, which is used to create and test decks. So let's just dive straight into that. Okay, so here we have the YuGiOh Pro client, and we've imported our hero deck into it. The client lets us do some test hands right here, so let's hop into that to figure out the controls. After learning the controls for a bit, I hopped into some duels, including one against our Dragon Link friend from all the way back in episode 1. This practice has made me much more comfortable with the deck, and the plan to go first seems to be working well. So let's see how it translates in locals. Okay, going into locals, all of our matches were actually rematches, so we have no more rogue deck surprise advantage, and let's just see how we do. First round, we're up against Phantom Knights. Game 1, we lose the die roll and end up going second. I still don't really know where to hit this deck to slow it down, but the special summon off of Graph seemed like a good bet, and ultimately it didn't seem to slow them down too much, because they still ended up on a board of Dragoon, Anaconda, and Rusty with 2 Fog Blades. We open up with a Dark Ruler no more and have a Cyclone in hand to deal with one of the Fog Blades, but we still have to traverse through 1 Monster Negate. I'm expecting the first Fog Blade to hit Stratos, so I summon him out, and when he doesn't get Fog Bladed, I get to search for Prime Faris discard fodder, so I go and grab Shadow Mist. We then go on to summon our Faris, spinning Shadow Mist, adding Liquid Soldier to hand, to plan to go into Sunrise, etc. for a full board clear. However, when we continue by summoning Increase, he's the one that gets hit by the first Fog Blade, so we can't summon Viant from deck. Given I knew how painful Increase's effect was being negated with stuff like Ash, I really should have seen this coming, but I've wasted a search on fusion material I can't use, and we're now left with material to make Cross Crusader but no Destiny hero in our grave. If I'd at least grabbed Honest Neos, I could knock out the Dragoon with Stratos, but I managed to blunder basically every choice this turn and get knocked out the next turn. Moving on to game 2, we decide to go first and bring in our Imperms and back row hate for the Fog Blades and some bells for any graveyard action. So going first, we have Vion in hand, which bins Shadow Mist for a Rota to get to Faris. We don't have a Mask Change for Dark Lord, but I can get to Plasma from here until we get hit by the rock. At that point, all we can do is set 2 and pass. We use our Imperm on a Break Sword to stop it going into Rebellion Dragon, which leads our opponent to pass with a face-down Fog Blade, which we Cyclone in their end step. The first thing I noticed on the following turn is that 3 of our 4 Garnets for the Vision Hero package are in the grave, and I forgot to use the Increase effect in my grave when our opponent damaged us in their turn. In this case, Increase would have been perfect, as even without a Vion in deck, Increase could have just grabbed another Increase from deck to go into our second Cross Crusader. Instead, we summon our Liquid Soldier, revive Shadow Mist, and search for Mask Change. Liquid Soldier and Shadow Mist go into Cross Crusader, he revives Dynatag, and then tributes him to add Malicious to our hand. Faris in hand bins Malicious to summon itself, and since I need to get to a non-dark, Faris links with Cross Crusader to summon Wonder Driver, who we poly with a Malicious summoned from deck to bring out Sunrise, and then the Miracle Fusion brings out Absolute Zero. I then go on to make a super greedy play. Sunrise and Absolute Zero are already enough to wipe my opponent's board using Sunrise's effect to pop Nibiru, so this Mask Change would have been much better off being set and used during my opponent's turn to prevent their rebuild. Or I could have tributed Absolute Zero to summon Increase, getting the board wipe, and then swinging for 7,000 and ending on a Dark Claw with my Sunrise. However, we only dropped them to 2100, which isn't even enough to prevent Dragoon coming out. Ultimately, Rusty and Breaksword destroy our remaining heroes, and with only 4k life points, we're just dead on board. Watching this bag was super frustrating because I wasn't actually that far off. But things like adding the wrong hero to hand or using Mask Change at a bad time really highlight my inexperience, and having to face those mistakes and see more and more scenarios where the deck can win but I fail to make it happen is incredibly humbling. It just keeps reassuring me though that there's plenty of room to grow with this deck. Round 2, and it's time for our grindiest game to date against our friend, the zombie player. I'm avoiding names as I haven't checked if they're okay being named, but it's the same zombie player from last week. We lose the die roll again, and our opponent goes first. They open up with a Gozuki, which we hit with an Ash to prevent them extending, so they end up passing with the Gozuki, Zombie World, and a face down. We, on the other side, draw a Ferris for turn, which we can't play because our hand is Master Change, 2 Dark Rulers, a Cyclone, and the new Ferris. We pass, setting the Cyclone and a Dark Ruler, and basically any hero in place of the second Dark Ruler would have been incredible here, but it just wasn't meant to be. This is the point where I learned that Gozuki isn't just on summon, so our opponent gets to foolish Glow Up Bloom, banishing it to search a zombie. We change Cyclone to Bloom's effect to remove Zombie World, so they add to hand instead of special summon. They continue by using an Ash to link it to Avenged Savior, attack, and pass to us. We get hit by Savior again, and then we finally draw into Dynatag. Why is it always Dynatag? Anyway, this means we can now summon our Ferris and build to a board of Sunrise, Darklaw, and Absolute Zero. As we attack with Darklaw, our opponent activates Super Poly and uses our Darklaw and their Savior to bring out Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, who walls us off by boosting to nearly 6k attack. On the next turn, our opponent attempts to go into a Borrowload Savage Dragon, to the effect of which I chain Mass Change on my Absolute Zero to summon Acid and wipe the board. Starving Venom returns the favor, however, which leads us into a few draw passes until our opponent activates Red Eyes Fusion, which we negate with Ash. On our next turn, we use Fusion Destiny to go into Dystopia and plan to pop Zombie World with its effect. I forget about Dynatag being in our graveyard from earlier and don't use it on Dystopia, which would allow us to go into Cross Crusader and keep extending. This ends up being crucial as, if I had buffed Dystopia prior to having a second monster on board, I could have popped Zombie World before the set Super Poly turns my monsters into a Draco Necro. Once our opponent brings out their Bale Drug, the game is basically sealed. Under Zombie World, we can't extend through Cross Crusader, and even if we could, Bale Drug's negate and banish effects would stop anything we brought out. After bashing Dynatag earlier, he ended up being the perfect out to Zombie World and Super Poly when we had Dystopia. I just completely forgot about him. So we go on to game 2 and we try our classic going first trick. And after getting to a Dark Claw protected by Honest Neos, we then get T-boned by a Dark Ruler. I can literally hear the disbelief in my voice in the recording, because our opponent put their chips on us going first and it paid off big time, as we now basically have a 2400 vanilla against Dark Dragoon. Time ends up getting called before their battle phase, so the game ends in a tie, but overall the round goes to them. Despite that Dynatag misplay, the first game felt super fun to play. We were basically one graveyard effect away from playing through 2 Super Polys, assuming they didn't have a second Starving Venom, which is usually only a one-off. Again, a case of the deck having the right tools and me just forgetting about them. Round 3, we ended up with a bye, so I decided to go and spectate another game after asking, to go and see Trap Tricks in action, which seemed like a lot of controlling elements and just beating them down with Dragoon, something I'm pretty sure would have kept our heroes under control had we faced them. Round 4, we get paired up with the Salamangreat player from the first week. With both of us being newer to the game, this felt like a comfortable end to the evening, but we do now both know all of each other's cards, so we won't be going to time this time. Game 1, we lose the die roll and are made to go second, and our opponent ends up on a Topologic Zeroboros that they climb to using Transcode Reviving Splash Mage, which fortunately couldn't go into Avramex. So Zeroboros has a fun effect where if I summon to a zone a link monster points to at all, then it banishes the whole field and revives itself next turn. Since my Cross Crusader and Zeroboros combined would confine me to only 2 main monster zones, which is clearly too few, I opt to abuse chains to safely detonate the Zeroboros by summoning Ferris straight into one of its arrows. This puts Ferris's effect as Chainlink 1 and Zeroboros as Chainlink 2, causing the field to be banished, then increase to go into my spell and trap card zone. From here, we build to a Dread Decimator and Sunrise, who, combined with the Mass Change in our hand, swing for game. Game 2, our opponent opts to go first again, and we end up staring down an end board of co-linked Avramex, Transcode Toolkit, and Splash Mage with 3 cards in hand. The co-linked is important because it means they're all 500 attack stronger. Without any set traps and such a confident board setup, I'm really skeptical of what's in their hand, as they most likely brought in draws or Nibiru against us. The only card in my deck that can out-Avramax cleanly is Plasma, so when I summon the Stratos and his effect doesn't get ashed, I go for Plasma and get Drolled as expected. The remaining cards in our hand end up getting us to a board of Cross Crusader, Escuridao, Plasma, and Dystopia, with Plasma equipping Avramax and Dystopia using the buff from Dynatag, which I remembered this time. To pop the Transcode Talker, we then rumble in for the OTK. These are probably some of the first clean games I've ever played with this deck, and it's clear that I was subconsciously learning from the mistakes in the earlier rounds. I was searching the correct outs, remembering my graveyard effects, and I just need to start the night off like this from now on. Another 2-2 thanks to a bye week leaves us in 4th place for the league. Not a terrible standing, but it's worth remembering that half our wins are byes right now. That said, even the games we're losing, there are lines to victory, and a new play to add to my toolbox is summoning Dystopia with Dynatag and using Dynatag to enable Dystopia's pop right away. So, despite not having the best results so far, I feel happy with how much I'm learning about the deck, and how much my understanding of the game's systems such as chains etc. is coming along. That said, there's one disturbing trend at our locals. That's right, Dragoon is starting to be a very common card we face, and I'm just hearing more murmurs of others picking it up soon. It's a big body with a monster negate, and should we fail to out it, then it just wipes our 2 best monsters out the following turn. We need a more consistent solution to this that isn't just praying for a Dark Ruler and hoping our increase doesn't get ashed. So the solution I've opted to go for is Super Polymerization. This card is an absolute powerhouse in many decks, but especially in heroes. Unfortunately, we don't have the Shining to make it live versus light decks, but we do have Escuridao, Starving Venom, and Dragos Depelia. I was thinking about Muddragon also, but most decks right now share type more than they share attribute, so it wouldn't be live a lot of the time, and the extra deck is a bit tight to have it as a random one-of. Super Poly is actually a great card going both first and second. Going first, it's a great piece of back row that demands removal, and going second, it can start the process of outing boards by taking away the 2 biggest threats, and maybe binning a Shadow Mist while we're at it. In the case of Dragoon, it uses Verte Anaconda to basically make it a Link 2, but that leaves 2 darks open for the poly. It also has game against many other decks that just really don't want you to remove 2 of their dark monsters, and also get a Raigeki on legs. And finally, it can help when going for game by allowing us to attack with another fusion monster by activating in the battle phase. However, putting Super Poly in our deck is going to demand some reasonable deck changes that I'm going to take the time to research as best as I can, so we'll cover the new deck list in the next episode. The last thing I wanted to talk about this week is the locals community and how things have been going there. This week, I took some time after the event to join in on some conversations and got a chance to talk to some of the other players about potentially playing games outside of locals. And I also got to have a good chat with some guys, particularly about some upcoming product. And they confirmed my prediction about Legendary Duelist Season 3 and how it's going to impact the price of Bane and Gold. Specifically, one of them expects that one of those 2 will end up being a promo in the set, and based on past reprints in the sets, such as Season 1 and Season 2, it's likely that both Bane and Gold will drop in price considerably, so we're definitely waiting out for that reprint instead of paying the exorbitant prices they are now. We also got to discuss some deck building ideas, and I got to explore some different ideas around the way hero decks can be built. Mostly ideas that I hadn't really considered before about using non-hero cards as starters and extenders and such. I'm not really planning on directly implementing any of those changes that we discussed with my deck rebuild next week, but just being able to see that there's a lot of great options out there that just help you branch out rather than sticking to the standard Omni-Hero OTK list. It's these kind of moments where I just sit and chat for nearly 3 hours after an event that reminded me what I enjoyed about playing card games so much in the first place. The community side of things after a tournament where we just go grab some food and talk about ideas, random tangents, etc. It's something that had been missing from my experience of YuGiOh so far until this locals, and I hope once in-store play opens up again, I can get a similar experience with my local community. And that wraps us up for this week. I've got an impending feeling of Dragoon going into next week, so I'm going to be using that to fuel my efforts in rebuilding the deck, to hopefully put on a strong showing. I'm still hoping to get to a point where we can get more than 2 wins a week, but so far we've been perfectly consistent. Anyway, hope to see you in the next one.